it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of our members who everyone knows, Alf Gaebler. Alf, as a young lad, attended the Maylands Meccano Club, and I'll say no more, but I'll pass it over to Alf, who I'm sure will give us a very interesting talk about the Meccano Club in Maylands, and you'll tell them how long it's been running and so on. So I'll leave it to you, Alf.
This is not original research, by the way. The material I'm going to speak to was prepared by Ross Smith, the executive of the club, and I'm essentially going to read to you what he has prepared, because it goes back further than my time. My time started in 1941, which is not that long, or at least the club started about 1935, so he can fill in a bit more. The history of, or the story of the Maylands Meccano and Hobbies Club has a start not very different from many others. And you talk about all around the world where the Meccano Club started. However, there's a part of the story that's rather different from most current clubs. Some people may be aware that part of the story can be found in the club's notes in the Meccano magazine. Now, this is a paper that he prepared for the Meccano Man. That's the official magazine that had been prepared by the International Meccano Man. He has on it a small picture of the clubhouse as it is now, plus a very small picture of the, which you can't read because it's too far away and it's not very clear, of the tables that they used. Vivian Malmgreen founded the club in the Perth suburb of Maylands in 1935. Now, the whole essence of the Maylands Meccano Club revolves around Viv Malmgreen. I met him when I was 10, and I came from a very, very poor background. We were very badly hit by the depression. Dad was always on sustenance. And the idea of going to the Meccano Club was something that changed my life, and mine and many other boys as well. So I have a very fond recollection of Vivian, Viv as we call him. Now, Viv was a very quiet man. He worked as a storeman all his life over at the Southern Cross Windmill Company. Very humble job, and he had no family, no kids. And the club wasn't life. But I have to say, and I want you to listen to what this man achieved during his lifetime, his complete lifetime, and just imagine in this day and age whether he would have been allowed to. I have to put it to you that this day and age is not a very nice one when it comes to opinions on other people. And Viv Malmgreen, to my mind, and it's proved over that, was a man amongst men. And I have to say that we've lost a lot in suspicion and the whole idea that one man can take a group of children and do wonders with them. Anyway, I'll continue. That's one. He founded in 1935. The club was for children to build Meccano models, not adults. Every time I go to the, oh sorry, not every time, but I go every day to the park. And today I went there and I heard this noise, and lo and behold, there's half a dozen men playing with helicopters and aeroplanes. Well, you didn't see any of that type of thing when I was a kid. Play was for kids. So consequently, he's made that point, and I want you to remember it for later in the story.
You're not going to ask questions. You're not going to ask questions.
No. The club joined the Meccano Guild in 1936 and still has the original certificate signed by Frank Hornsby himself, who was the man that founded Hornby and Hornby Train, but Meccano in 1911. Remarkable. Became very wealthy. But a remarkable story if you want to go back and just read about Hornsby the man. Anyway, they had the original certificate still there, and there were two other clubs formed in Western Australia, one at Fremantle and one in Albany, separate altogether, Maylands. This club followed the usual pattern of development of meccano clubs. The club met for model building in a shed at the rear of the Melbourne Green property. In addition to its meccano activities, the club conducted fundraising activities and used the profits to purchase equipment and books. Now, the club room, as I remembered it, was not as it is today. This is one that's there now, is reconstructed. The one I remember was a lean-to, essentially. And my brother-in-law was a health and safety officer, was a health officer, and I doubt if it would have been passed, because I can remember distinctly the internal lining was something that you wouldn't have wanted to put a match to. It would have gone up in a matter of minutes. But never worried about it, didn't happen. World War II saw Viv enlisted for military service. The club continued to operate in his absence, being largely run by the senior boys. Now that was a remarkable thing. And bear in mind, I started in 1941, and the fact that there were senior boys there, I thought was normal. I had no idea that you needed adults to run anything, because it ran beautifully. It was run for children, almost by children, if you put it that way. When World War II ended, Viv returned, but the running of the club remained with the boys. Viv remained a mentor and a wise counsellor for the club. Remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Membership grew with the post-war baby boom and was aided by migration to Australia for many families of in the UK origin. Now I have a confession to make. Around the time the war ended, by about 1947, I had a bad attack of hormones and started to run around after girls and having a little drink here and there, and left the club. And that was the fate of many people. It just seemed to happen that way. It was quite sad. I felt quite regretful later when I had my own children and thought, why aren't they in the meccano club? Anyway, the relative prosperous times saw the club demolished, and the original shed and new club rooms were put on the same site. These comprised a small one-bedroom flat at the front and a large open hall for model making behind. So Viv lived in the premises. The Maylands Club continued into the 1970s, aided by the vibrant development and engineering atmosphere in Australia and Western Australia in particular. The club maintained its established and fairly strong hierarchy and protocols for the boys. More experienced older boys were expected to act as role models and mentors for the less experienced younger model builders. I can tell you that I was the leader of one of the so-called factions, and mine was the most distinguished one. It was blue and gold, and we had our own complete badge, which my brother and I had made. Very luxurious. It was, we thought it was wonderful, and we were obviously the best. And but they didn't have a very fair method of allocating kids to your faction. It was somewhat out of your control, and I got the most useless lot of kids that you could possibly have. And that's like most of them mentors. Anyway, that was the way things worked. You had young boys, and some of them, I have to tell you, some of them were absolutely brilliant. Some of them were not so brilliant, but had other attributes, and some were very handicapped. And they all formed equal membership in the club. Made no difference, which I thought was normal. I thought it was normal. With advancing age, Viv made a very dedicated and generous decision for the club. The ownership of the property, which was his home and where the club operated, was transferred to the club. This ensured it had a home regardless of his own fate. He continued to live in the flat at the front. I wasn't surprised when I did that, not at all. The stock of meccano parts in the club had come from all of the different meccano eras, as commonly recognised by their colours. I can remember only the red and green ones, but apparently they went quite exotic in various places. The stock included a small amount of nickel, some blue, gold, and a majority of various shades of red and green. All the parts in the club were for model building. They were not there for museum or collector purposes. This includes what would now probably be considered priceless pieces. And I'm sure now. It was one of those wonderful things that you could go out anywhere. I started work in the Public Works Department in 1947 as a trainee junior clerk, and I was in the plant and mechanical and plant engineers section. And I can still remember quite clearly, I used to love technical books, so I would grab all the books I could find on automotive or mechanical works or anything like that, and I knew everything about it. I knew what a trunnion was, I knew what a gear wheel was, I knew what a sprocket was, I knew everything, all about them. And I just absorbed it. I realised exactly what they were doing, how they were doing it. I'm not quite sure whether I would have that capacity without this long training in manipulating these little tiny parts. Also, it did teach you patience, because when you're surrounded by a lot of young boys and the damn thing wouldn't work, you couldn't throw it on the floor. You had to keep going. Because you didn't throw things on the floor. Yeah. Very little of the short, going into the colours, I won't go into some of those things. They repainted all the stock so that they became the same colour, which was a good idea. In parallel with the declining influence of meccano from the 1980s, a similar trend can be seen in the club's membership. Numbers continued to fall during the 1990s until eventually the club was at the point of being wound up. At this time, and largely by chance, a small group of adult meccano men got together to test the concept of retaining the club. On April 1st, 2000, approximately 12 adults, including former childhood meccano boys, returned to the meccano, resolved to continue the club, and with a difference. The group decided that the club would continue, but now both as an adult club and also for model building children. Children attended on sessional basis with up to 12 at any one time, but usually fewer. Some of the girls, girls, meccano, they don't have the hands for it, I'm sure. Some of the girls attending have shown themselves to be very good model builders. One adult member, at least, is rostered on duty for each Saturday afternoon. So they have model building on Saturday afternoon and games Wednesday. I'm not sure which one I like best. I think games were good. Anyway, the club still meets in its own premises, has its own literature and its own stock of parts. The children who may not have any meccano of their own, I think I have a timer to the model set at home, which I never used, which you could never find the parts. Even if you do meccano and with paint chipped, bent and rusty parts, the children continue to build models. Many attempt much more ambitious models than they could with their own small parts. And that was the feature of the whole thing. Aside from actually making the part, what actually happened, those of you who have ever been here, have any of you ever attended? You know what's that? Well, yeah, well, the feature of it was that model building is not made intuitively or out of your own head or geniuses. It's all done out by illustrations and diagrams and instructions. And they've had a system where they would come in either, I'm not quite sure, I never saw the originals, but they probably came in magazines. You could get one or two copies, and paste them on a fairly solid cardboard, sheets of cardboard that they'd be about, what would be foolscap size and that stuff. And they were pasted one on each side, so that you would decide what you were going to build. And there was a list of all the various things you could build. Now, up on the corner here, two of them, they had very large cupboards, open swing doors, and inside was a vast array of beautifully made little drawers and shelves, all catalogued. Everything was numbered. It was a standard numbering system, of course. And when you decided what you want to make, with some advice as to whether you were capable of doing it or not, you would have the ability to have the opportunity of going over and getting the parts. I think it was done in pairs so that you didn't muck it up. So one would read the part and you'd go over and you'd get number 38 or 58 or 73B or whatever, and you'd count out so many and they'd be checked so that you would put in your workbox all the parts that you needed for that particular model. And then you would go ahead and make it. And you had the right number of parts, so it wasn't like fixing your car and you left the part out. They were the right number. The interesting thing was that at the conclusion of making the model, it was only, you didn't keep it forever. There was a set time during which you could play or boast or show off or whatever you want to do, or generally it was for an exhibition, even if it was only a club exhibition. Or your mum would have to come and see it. But then you had to break it down and put it back in its right place. And the idea of getting something from a catalogue and carefully counting out and then carefully putting back, I can just make you think for what type of training that would be for young people. Not in their bedrooms, obviously, nowadays, just everywhere. But that was very interesting. I'll read now from a man that I remember. One of the boys that actually kept the club going during the wartime, because Viv actually went to the war, and I'll read a little bit more about that. This will come out in, this is called A Tribute to Mr. Viv Malmgreen by Bert Whitney. I remember Bert very well. I've got a photograph of him, and I'll pass some of these around. Firstly, I'll show you what I've done. Sorry I haven't got these on overhead. I could have done it, but I didn't even keep ahead of these. That's still Malmgreen. I'll pass it around for one sure. Wonderful man. He was good chap. These were all blown up a little. Photography actually came into this in a bit because the club actually covered very much more than meccano. I often wonder whether I was taken by meccano or some of the other things. I think some of the other activities got me in more. Those clever young boys who could make wonderful models probably liked meccano better, but I had more wider interest. One of them was photography, and we had little brownie cameras and things like that, and we would use those. But there's an official photograph here taken in 1947, and it shows the boys in their best clothes. Unfortunately, by best clothes, I only had a pair of sandals. That's all I had. So I sit in the front row so you can see it very clearly. That's Bert Whitney there. And he's there with his brothers. It was a wonderful guy. He was the one that kept the club going during the time that Viv was away. Pass that round too. My brother's there, my friend from over the road, Boise Chester, Alan Montgomery, Des Tyers, Alan Bunn, Alan Pepper, Keith Leppard, Neville Woods, his name's mentioned in one of the things there, and quite a few. Graham Friend, F-R-I-E-N-D, yeah. So,
what year would that photography start? Around about 47 or 50, 1950?
That was taken in 1947, but I'm talking about photography for myself.
Yeah.
They didn't do it in the club. It was the thing in those days. If you had a Brownie camera, you So, but I just thought I'd let you know what Bert Whitney looked like when I read to him about Bert Whitney. Several past members of the Meccano Club helped me to recall what we did 50 or more years ago and how Bill Malmgreen helped to shape our lives. I met Bill Malmgreen when I joined the Maylands Meccano Club in 1938, so he joined 3 years after the start. He was 10 at that time, so he was a bit older than me. He was a quiet, almost shy man in his mid-20s who lived with his crippled mother at Kennedy Street, Maylands. Viv had a small shed at the side of his house near a large mulberry tree. I always remember the mulberry tree. Everyone seemed to have mulberry trees. And we didn't know that if you got the white one and wiped it on, you'd get it off, because you just went home and covered it and stuff for your mother. There was which was the club rooms, where we met on Saturdays for model building and for games on Wednesday evenings. Meccano Limited in England promoted their products by supporting the formation of Meccano clubs throughout the world, with rules and objectives for clubs, plans and photographs of mechanical models, and an emphasis on good citizenship, leadership, cooperation and initiative. Viv started the Maylands Meccano Club in 1935, and as the membership grew, he had to enlarge the club room to accommodate members, and then a waiting list for those wishing to join. And they became the Reserve Club. They had a reserve club as well. There was a limit to how many you get in. And there was already factories and shops inspectors just as well. Now anyway, among the activities which Viv organised were a harmonica club conducted and taught by Vic Delano. That had been and gone by the time I got there. I wish to goodness I had known. I would have loved to have learned a bit of music. Didn't then. The performances were broadcast by radio at 6 p.m. What I do remember is bike hikes on weekends to Noble Falls, Hovia Falls, John Forrest National Park, and many other locations, camping holidays, train excursions, outings to special events, to beaches, to zoos, and to the museum. Now, there's an example at Hovia Falls. Hovia Falls, this is taken in 1941. That's one of my first years, and I am there. I'm a 10-year-old, and I've just fallen over the falls.
Oh. Was the hotel there then?
No, it was nothing. We went up by train.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean you were going to it.
There's a lot of the boys there. I can see, not a very good photo, because this photo was only a tiny little wee one.
Yeah.
But that's typical of what we did. Now, if you see, if I pass the train, you'll see that some of the boys, I could remember them as being very old, but they're probably about 15. But mate, anyway, that was it. I was very lucky that day, because I was the only one that fell over the falls, but I was also the only one that didn't get caught up in all the broken glass at the bottom of it. Just missed it all. So that was Hovia Falls, and this is another one. In those days, the idea of an outing was by train, because there was a Maylands railway station, and pretty well all the housing settlements were along train lines. And one of the great features was to go to South Beach, and there we all are at South Beach in 1942, and we had fantastic bathers where the crunch dropped about 6 inches. And again, there's about 43 children there. And again, you'll see there's various size shapes, goodness knows what. And I've got the most awful bathers of the lot. Anyway, but that's one of the days we had, and there was no messing around. We just had a wonderful time, because of course in those days at South Beach we couldn't be eaten by sharks because they had a shark net. You think people are worried about sharks now? They were terrified about them then. So we were able to go in and swim without sharks. Another thing that was mentioned there. Now there's a photograph of the type of kids that went on train trips. Now my young brother's there. We had a wonderful time. That's actually going to Comscott. I don't know what we did when we got there, but we'd all get in. If you all remember how you did this on a train, what you did, when you got in the train carriage, you made sure that you all packed up against the window so that any adult wouldn't get in. You always got up and looked like that, made a lot of noise, and they never came near you. It was really good. That's another one of my brother and my two brothers, and Don and Trevor Coltis at Darlington. Now, you know, now you know that, Trevor, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's them. That's another type of thing. You notice we're well dressed. Another thing we did was, for some reason, we went down to the South Fremantle Shell Depot, and they showed us all over the Shell Depot, the installations they had there, and we were treated as adults. Because we said we were the Meccano Club, they didn't treat us like a mob of young babies.
No?
We were shown around everything. We also went to the Midland workshops. I remember doing that. In the last 18 months ago, I went to what's left of the Midland workshops, and there was only a vestige of what was there. And I was able to tell the chaps that were taking us round, I remember that, and I know what that is. And I could, all of those things that were there. The only thing that was absent was the noise in the boiler room. And what I couldn't get over was how the men in the boiler room continued to speak to each other, and they could seem to hear each other. We couldn't hear anything, just noise. And the other thing was we went to the Royal Mint. Now the Royal Mint was dealing in real gold, not this play business that they do now where they boil up the 1 bit of gold or something big. And they told us with great pleasure that as we walked along, they are convinced that as we walked out we would carry some of the gold with us on our shoes, which we were very interested in. So you can see the club had its outgoing was a vivid memory to me, not just meccano. Okay. The club was always well attended on Saturday afternoon and night for model building. And on Wednesday nights, which was the games night, Monopoly got fairly willing if someone thought someone was cheating. Sometimes to the point where we've had to intervene. Boys will be boys. Table tennis, quoits, darts, and murder were played. Does anyone know what murder is? Murder? Well, it's a good game for boys. You wouldn't want to have girls there. Now, the idea is they had special cards, and each had a little character on them. I don't think they were made for this reason, but we use it for this reason. And Viv's the club room had only 2 windows in it, which could be blacked out. Bear in mind this was during the war, so they would be blacked out. You could cut the darkness inside with a knife. The idea was we had no seats. We had trestle tables, which we made ourselves, and trestle tables and just benches to sit on. The idea was the cards were all handed out, and we didn't show everyone what your card was. And each of them had a character. One would be policeman, another would be cook, another one would be whatever, all different occupations. Very English, very English. These were the types of days when we were all very British. Anyway, during the run-up to the start of the evening, an announcement would be made as to who was the murderer. And this would be announced by virtue of character. So, obviously, it might be the cook who had access to knives. Cook will be the murderer tonight. No one knew who it was. No one knew who anything was. So the idea was the person who was the murderer did know who he was. So during the time, a 5-minute interval would be allowed, and each would be watching the other. Because the murderer, of course, was looking for a likely victim. The others were looking to see who was likely to be the murderer. Eventually the light would be turned out, jet black. No movement, no sound, because everyone's trying to hear what's going to happen. And depending on, well, some nasty types took their shoes off and only walked out in socks. And the next thing you'd know, if you had been selected, would be a pair of hands reach round your throat and go, and you'd be semi-throttled with all the noises. It was expected to make plenty of noises. A suitable time would be allowed for the murderer to get back to his or his seat. You see why I didn't want the girls in on this? They make a terrible noise when you strangle them. Anyway, then eventually the lights would be put on and the policeman would nominate himself. I am the policeman and I'm going to find out who it is. And he would proceed to interrogate and use all the clues that he had. Virtually never ever found the murder, but that wasn't the point. The whole point was doing the murdering. And the second point was being the murdered, because you could go into all the historics and fall on the ground and have a wonderful time. The sheer terror of sitting there waiting for the murderer was what made it real. And that, to my mind, has always been part of the great fun of childhood. It's a little bit of terror that's mixed in with the games. Oh, I can still remember murder. I'm glad he put it there. Many other games were played until home time at 10 p.m. Special evenings were the 8mm and 16mm films, which Viv showed. We all enjoyed. Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and other slapstick films of past years. And to us, they were fresh and new. They weren't old-fashioned. We thought they were what you would get. They were fantastic. You could hire them.
Were talkies?
Oh, didn't talkies, no, didn't have television. But the point about it was he could hire them. And it was sad. So we didn't have any entertainment except radio at home. And to see something like that, it was like the crowd that watched the first television. It was that thrill of being in it. Anyway, here's one I didn't realise. They also, the police approval had to be obtained for a Daisy air rifle set up in the backyard. It had to have a hessian cover over the top of the targets to stop stray ricochet pellets hitting the ducks and nearby neighbours, or the shooters and spectators themselves. There were also one or two parties each year. I can remember the parties. Now, bear in mind, they were tough days. We hadn't had much to eat, and there was. Well, I didn't. I don't know. Some of the others were pretty well fed, but it was a time of shortages, very much. And the idea of having a party was something that very few of us could afford. So the club had one, and they would buy they would get a keg of cool drink, ginger beer, and the mothers would come along. And that's the only time we saw parents. Now, I think I have to make this particularly clear. I lived in 9 Morrison Street, Mayland. The club room was over in Kennedy and Marlborough Street, over the line. Go along Foundry Street, up Caledonian Avenue, get to Railway or Milton Place, whatever, and then straight up Kennedy Street. Mum never accompanied us. No adult accompanied us. We walked there ourselves. And we walked home again. That was normal. Wherever you went to the Cubs, you walked. Went to school, you walked. So we had these parties. Some boys, this sounds terrible, doesn't it? Some boys had competitions to see who could eat the most without being sick. I won at least twice. Not funny, I won twice. No, it was. That's what it was. It was really beautiful. It was the thing you look forward to. Oh, fantastic. One Christmas party I recall, Mrs. Bird, Peter's ice cream had doubled up on our order. And there was a lot of leftover. So we went to the club on Saturday morning and ate the lot. So by about the age of 17, which when I'd left the club, that tradition was continued in a different setting. I can remember going to a party at which there was a 5-gallon keg and 6 blokes. When I say blokes, I was one of them, you know what I mean? And we couldn't possibly drink it that night, so we would go the next morning and drink this rotten, flat beer, because it was beer we had to drink. But ice cream was probably about 40. Many of us lost our appreciation of ice cream for several months after that party. The most important events of our club were our exhibitions, usually once each year with 3 factions competing for points. Some of the others actually won once. Some of the exhibits showed the real initiative and skills which Viv was able to bring out in so many of the boys. Harbour scenes with cranes, boats, trucks, machinery, as well as all kinds of beach sand and inside Viv's house. No, I was responsible for that. Grandfather clock with its heavy brass weights. I think I mentioned that when I was 16, I started at 15, but by the time I was 16, I was still in the club, and I was in the public works mechanical branch. Well, prior to that, the exhibitions I'd put on had been a beach landing scene, because it was war, and I had a corner of the club room, and I had some of the trestles, and I made, and we'll see it might not sit there anyway, I made a model of a destroyer, our Boxer, in profile, and that went against the back wall, and then we did a landing strip with all sand up so that it all made a beach with blue cellophane and all that stuff, and planes coming down and all that. Yeah, but it was static, very static. The next one I did was a motor car sales yard. Now, motor cars were very hard to get in those days, and the motor cars were throwback to the 1930s, so you didn't have to be too fantastic in making a car. It just had to be a box, basically. So we made one of these, but one of the attributes that we learned was how to use low-powered electricity. So we would have electric motors, and we'd also have very small globes which we could flash. So the idea of having a show event was fancy cars here and flashing lights all over it, you see. So not quite a static, well, a little more active than the other one. I think it became second in that. But the piece de resistance was my episode at the Public Works. And I was reading some of the hydraulic engineers' material on rivers in the northwest. And I picked on one of them, which seemed to have a pretty good flow, and I worked out what I could do. I was going to make a dam. But the only dams I'd ever seen in my life were the dams around Perth, and they're all concrete arch dams. They're concrete, they depend on the sheer weight of the concrete and the arch form to act as a barrier. And I thought, well, probably won't have concrete up in the northwest. So I'll make an earth dam, which I'd read about, because you used to get the books in the club and there'd be a lot of encyclopedias. So they're all on industrial things, or long industrial things. So I read all about that, and I made an earth dam in Viv's lounge. His house was not part of the club room, it was separate at the back. And he had a little bedroom here, and a room about that long, with the door here. And all that area I cleared out and filled with sand. And I asked him first. And the idea was that there was a valley. So we had a hill there and a hill there. And had different coloured sand here for the impervious layer that the dam needs. And then yellow sand on the other side. And because I knew about them by now, sheep's foot rollers, in those days all the bulldozers had no hydraulics, so it had little moving things. So I had side lifters, I had tilt dozers, I had angle dozers, I had bulldozers, I had, you name it. and I had the most useless mob of people in my faction to help me. They were hopeless. So Bill and I did most of it because we would get them to make simple models for us. But we covered in models, and I remember prior to it we decided that we needed to vegetate it. So I got the kids and we walked up to, I don't know why, but we made an expedition of it. We walked up to where Hillcrest School is. There was no bush, no house or anything around there. And we collected bush and we broke them up and made them into separate areas with trees, so the whole thing was vegetated. And then I did a 5-page report on waterfalls, the catchment area, the whole lot, and how this project would work. And whoever came into the room couldn't get out, because I would tell them all about this. I think I got first in that, but I worked hard to get first on that one. But what I'm just saying, it was an illustration of how your life could be directed towards particular knowledge purely from starting in a club like this. I don't really know any other organisation that would have provided the same type of childhood capacity to learn. Fantastic. Because the basic thing was no one told you what to do. It was left to you to work out things. You had someone to help if you asked. Viv would say, "Oh, we're short of forms for Sydney," so we'd turn up in a Saturday afternoon and help make them. He didn't say, "Oh, gosh, you're holding the saw bomb." We just did it.
Oh.
We had to. Anyway, engineering works were another favourite, with overhead gantry cranes, lathes and drilling machines. Perhaps the most often built model was the meccanograph. Anyone remember the meccanograph? There have been things made since, particularly on computer programs, where you can get varying spirals. I remember during the 8-bit computer days, they had them more. Nowadays, they're a bit passé. But anyway, this machine, you'd stick a piece of paper on this little table, and you would set the parameters as regards the leverage, and turn it on, and the leverage could be altered virtually infinitesimally, and you get various spiralling effects. And at appropriate times you'd pull that pin out and put another one in, and you get different colours. And at the exhibitions we used to sell them. They used to be very good. So that was one of the popular ones. The exhibitions mostly in the club rooms, but they were sometimes in shops, particularly Lionel Sargent. He was a very good benefactor of the club. He was the chemist on the corner of Watley Crescent and 8th Avenue. He also was, as far as I'm concerned, a doctor, because we never went to doctors. Frequently they were opened by, we also had a Maylands Town Hall and other special locations. Frequently they were opened by important dignitaries, the Lieutenant Governor, the Premier, political identities, or community leaders. 1942, Viv joined the army and was soon posted overseas, leaving senior boys and the faction leaders that could run the club. However, as they reached the age of 18, they went into the armed services. At the age of 16, it became my task, this is Bert Whitney, to look after the club with a lot of help from Viv by letters, which he wrote every few weeks, and a loyal bank of younger club members and some of our parents. Between us, we managed to keep the club running until peace was declared and Viv returned again. Plans for a new club room became one of Viv's priorities, and with a dedicated bank of parents, he set about raising enough money to build. We will never know how much Viv contributed out of his own pocket to get the club room built. Hundreds of boys in our community benefited from their time in the Maylands Meccano Club under the care of Viv Malmgreen. He was a guide for those who were unsure of themselves, a father figure for those who had no father, a mentor and example for all of us who looked up to him. He was always able to give quiet, unassuming advice and guidance, whether with model building, fixing a bike, or personal problems. It was very well balanced, and a determined man, and he was one of us, one of the boys. Of the hundreds of boys who joined the club, most became responsible and useful members of society. Some found occupations which they would not have thought possible. This was in no small way to the training experience and attitude which they gained because of Viv Green and the Maylands Meccano Club. The Quiet Country honoured Viv with an MBE in 1968 for his dedicated work in guiding and training boys and for giving his lifetime to their welfare. Viv never married or had children of his own, but there are hundreds of past club members whom he regarded as his boys. We are all the better for having known him, for having been guided by him. So you can imagine how I feel about Viv. He was a fantastic man. Incidentally, there's a picture during that time. That's 1946. Yeah.
Question to ask you, was there any steam, a little boiler for driving any of those equipment?
We used to have a few models, but they weren't very effective. Unless they were a multi-cylinder, they didn't have the torque.
Oh, right.
You know, I had one at home, I think, an old one, and usually they were just a single cylinder, and you'd have to have a massive flywheel on to keep going. So that's one of, that photograph is taken just outside the front of the club room, and it's looking toward the house in the background is where Viv's relatives lived. His stepmother, or his after his mother died, they looked after Viv. And my brother married the daughter of that house. So, it all goes round. The house is no longer there. Sorry?
Are you in that one?
Oh, yes, I'm a good looking one. I'm the old one. I've got a tie on that time.
Oh,
And my brother. There's some interesting points here I think you should know about what actually happened later. And this comes from Ross Smith, and it's very much smaller writing. When the club re-established regular operations in April 2000, the initial objective was to operate on a single format to match the original founding intent. This was after Viv had died. Viv died in 1998, I think it was, and his ashes are actually in the grounds adjacent to the garden near the club room. The first aim was to provide an opportunity for children to discover and enjoy the magic of meccano in a club setting. Supporting activities such as table tennis and pool table were maintained to provide for their range of interests. Our scope was also broadened to encourage adult model building at the club. Now, when I read that, I realised what a huge change there had been. I made the point that, as far as I knew, the only adults we saw were those, aside from Viv, was the ones who helped us feed at the parties. That's it. And now, I wonder if they have helicopters in aeroplanes. So these changes reflect the reduced interest by children and provide an opportunity for the previously missing adult interest in the club. After an initial surge, we realised that children's attendance numbers were declining again. Despite this loss, this enabled the adults who were there to increase activity levels and embark upon club projects rather than just individual models. The change resulted in the construction of Tricky Track as a club model for exhibition purposes. Don't know what that is. A development program over the following years has resulted in the design and construction of new mechanisms to keep the exhibit fresh and visitors interested. So that basically was the big change. And I have here a photograph taken from, or photographs taken from their Meccano Club's website. And you'll see there, this photo on that side, are some of the adults who are running the club now. And the others show boys, and the ones at the bottom, that one there, is their anniversary dinner. I don't think they would have eaten the same way as we did. But that's basically a picture of the club room, and it shows the adults that are on it now. There was some. He goes into then the various models that they make, and there's been a change in that too, from what I can see. The models now, we only had the very basic of things. Sure, we had some interesting mechanical parts, and just to give you an idea of the type of things, you didn't have to have anything difficult, like you didn't have anything complicated. But for instance, I was looking at these cards that had all the details on them, and something looked relatively simple. It wasn't huge. It wasn't going to be a grandfather clock or whatever, but it happened to be a propeller of a giant liner. Now, in those days, if you wanted to travel from one country to another, you didn't fly, you went by boat. And the epitome would be the Queen Mary or the Queen Elizabeth. That's it, you know, because they were carrying troops over. So the idea is, it struck me, how the heck do they steer the rotten things? You know, these are massive in those days. So I saw this, and it said, this is a design for a rudder. So, oh, okay. And it stood about that high, you know, it made out of plate and everything. So I made it. And I couldn't get over it. It seemed so simple. But like all things, when you look at it, it is simple once you see how and once you make it work. And there's the rudder, huge thing. The ship's out there somewhere, huge thing there. You can't get a bloke with a lever, you know. Incidentally, I'll just tell you a little bit of interest. Do you remember that ship model they made of the Dutch ship, not the little
Dovken.
The Dovken. Now that had a most amazing system of steering. Did you see that? Okay, well, very small, called the Little Dove, and just to give an idea of what steering a ship is like, the steersman's down the bottom. Well, not down the bottom, but he's under the poop. The poop's the thing that sticks up at the top. He's there. He can't see where he's going. He's got no idea. There is a small opening up here, and the sails are there. And he's down here, and he's got a long pole, and he can't move it right across. Because the ship's narrow, he can move it to here, and he can move it to there. He can't do a right angle turn. That's it. So what happens, he watches the sails, and as the sails move, he moves this. And it's unbelievable that someone could work on that. Now, they always knew when they found the steersman in a shipwreck, because his ribs were broken. Every time the ship went, this thing, the force was just smashing, and that would be it. So I was a bit intrigued with this, how the heck some bloke was up there holding this. The lever must have been as long as the boat to move this. No. What they did was, there was a little appendage here, somewhat like an aerial on an aeroplane. If you remember, see the wings of an aeroplane, they have a little part that goes like that. So there's this, and at the back, there's a thing that goes like that. Now, if it goes like that, it forces the propeller, the rudder across that way. If it goes that way, it forces the rudder back that way. And all you need is a cog system to come down through the fulcrum here and work on the back end of the thing. Now, I worked it out at the age of, 14 or 15. And from then I thought, there's nothing mysterious in anything. It's just a matter of how you apply it. So that's the type of, I'm just using it as an example. So the skills that these things gave you was a recognition of what was possible in mechanics. Now I'm going to read a little bit here because it carries on the history a little bit more, and it's an interview on a radio station, 6PR, in 2001 between Ross Smith and a bloke by the name of Steve. He's probably one of them.
Steve Gordon.
Steve Gordon. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so he said, I suspect, Ross, that you're one of the men who he's talking about childhood and learning and things. And he was the secretary of the Maylands Meccano Club, and he joined us now. How are you going? And he said, very good. I just picked out some things. The Frank Hornsby, Hornby, no S, Hornby, patented the system of using meccano in 1901. And he called it meccano because it stood for Mechanics Made Easy. I don't know where you get meccano, but that's what it stood for, Mechanics Made Easy. And it wasn't a mechanic at all, it was just a bookmaker, or a bookkeeper. So he came from a modern background of mechanics. Anyway, the system they used is basic and continues to this day, and that is the holes in the strips were at half-inch centres and the bolts were 532 Whitworth thread. Now, one thing that I couldn't work out over those years, when you think about it, children are not very good at keeping things neat and tidy, or even well looked after. So, but the number of times nuts and bolts were done up and undone, and hundreds and hundreds of times, and it always worked. It was remarkable. They must have had the right clearances not to lock up so that you couldn't get them undone, and yet tight enough to be able to retain parts. It always amazed me. And even to this day, they use the same sentence no matter, because the history will say that the original development all went. Okay, they haven't changed at all. It started off as a very small set, and meccano went through a series of phases, and they basically developed a series of sets in ever-increasing size and complexity, up to the legendary 10 set, which everyone aspired to. Viv started off and eventually got himself to a number 6, and he thought his life was complete. He could now make whatever he wanted. He only had a 6. They were very expensive. It became known by the company sponsoring competitions, encouraging people to make things out of meccano, and obviously getting a lot of publicity out of it. Certainly did, and they went hand in hand with a magazine that they published. So that's what got Viv going. To talk about the colours and the various changes they went through, some were successful, some weren't. One stage they came out with striped pieces that lasted about one season. They also founded a company in America. Bear in mind that Hornby was very jealous of his patent, and it went through to his family. He became a very wealthy man, became a member of Parliament, actually, before he died. In America, he set up a factory in the US, but it was eventually taken over by a group called Gilbert Erector. I can remember times after I'd finished the meccano, seeing these other names, and I was thinking, oof, counterfeit, can't be any good. And yet they were basically exactly the same. So America had its own version of meccano. It's still compatible to the half-inch grid and the Whitworth thread, but slightly different in the shape of some of the pieces, but it was basically compatible. That's remarkable. It really is. It was because he didn't have a patent in the US, or did they make something different? Anyway, he said he doesn't know the exact details. He died, Hornby died in 1936, but the family took over the business. Now this is interesting. Yes, the family took over the business, and one of the sons was running the business at some of the time, and towards the end of the time, it went through a succession of owners, and that unfortunately continues to the current day. There has been some rapid changes in ownership. We were saying how did people start? Well, most people got a little set, a number 0, 1, 2 or 3, and something like that. And Hornby developed a conversion set you get from a number 1 to a number 2. You know, that's what you got for your birthdays from then on. You know, what shall we get for our? Oh, I'll give you my conversion to number 2. That's what you've got. You might not have wanted it, but anyway. And he was saying some of the complicated parts. They had wheels, but they had some pretty complicated gearing systems, some very specialised pieces that were virtually one-off. For instance, like pieces for making a loom, so that you could actually weave fabric, and some other specialised pieces like that. Quite remarkable. It wasn't kid stuff, if you know what I mean. It was not like you have nowadays, something that's totally limited. Most of the production in the factory was diverted to the war effort, so there were very few sets actually available coming out of the factory during the war. It was a very lean time for both meccano, and Viv and others went round trying to buy stuff second hand and repairing it, making use of them. It started that it did, and what happened that other companies started to produce compatible parts that were able to be used as a supplement to the original meccano. And in fact, in Australia, there were several of them. Don't know if you remember. There was one called Buzz, don't remember that, but there was another one called Easy Build. Remember that one? Easy Build. And they were not quite the same, but very, very similar. The same hole spacing of ½ inch and the same 532 Whitworth nuts and bolts. And they just produced these parts locally, and it reveals some of the strain of trying to get them. Now, I don't think you have any idea of how many parts the club owns. It was literally invaluable. I don't know how you could replace them. Aside from being a heritage, they're actually, this is the sheer number that I remember, and the job of keeping them neat and tidy was, and bear in mind you're dealing with kids, was quite remarkable. So you talk about plastics, which is the rage nowadays. The colour change and the invention of plastics actually had a big thing. It changed the colour and introduced a lot more parts that were actually able to be made in plastic a lot more easily than metal. And so there was a whole load of new parts that came as a result of being able to use plastic. So they incorporated it, which is good. They chat backwards and forwards. Now what happened? Which hasn't got on, they've got on to specialised things. They started to make specialised things so that you could have one that was only made a crane or make a truck or something like that. And that took a bit of the way. But what actually happened at the end of 1979, meccano went into receivership, and within a few months the factory had been closed and been demolished in Liverpool. What the fact they closed it, they demolished it within months. Absolutely astounding. The original French subsidiary became the individual company that took over the name of meccano. So meccano, even though we all remember with pride the defeat of the French during the days of King Henry, they took over meccano. Meccano took over Erector in America as well, and yes, the original factory in France continued with production, has become a big change for a British institution like meccano to be made in France. Incidentally, it's now owned by the Japanese. There's a factory in Argentina, and they make a thing called Exacto to the exact same specifications. So, fascinating stuff. One of the things that's special about the Maylands Club, one of the few clubs that actually has a stock of parts in the club itself. They're not owned by any individual. They're owned by the club, and so we're able to have kids come to the club on a regular basis every weekend and actually build things in the club room. And we look to those members we look for more members to pass on their skills to young people in the club room. So, there's another photograph of the kids working in the club. There are a couple of undesirables there by the way of adults, but that's okay. I have one regret that, and I probably thought about it too late, that I didn't automatically send my sons to the meccano club. You go through life and you do what you think's best. You're subject to a lot of pressures, particularly when you're a teenager. And then when you get married, and you go through the excitement of having children and all that. And imperceptibly, suddenly you realise they're 21. You know, they go through that stage, and they become swimmers, and they join the Cubs, and they do this and that. And the meccano club just got left out, and I regret it. I have to say, though, they did learn music, which I would have loved to have done. But if I'd been earlier in the club, I could have learned that harmonica. But that's about all I want to say. Is there any questions?
Well, it's sort of a program, I think it was SDS, that resembled some of your talk tonight. And of course, I went back over to the French group, and I think that was about it. But it was a program about 4 or 5 months ago. I think. I don't know anyone else saw it.
Yeah, there's not a lot of publicity about these things. Everything's overlaid by modern technology and computerisation. And this is the opposite to computerisation. You actually have to sit down and use your hands, all of your hands, not just thumbs. Which nowadays all the children have prehensile thumbs, but they can't use the other.
Just got some photographs of
yes,
if you go through those.
Yes, I know, I can tell you about a couple.
Yeah, and I'll bring it up and you can just talk to it. Yeah.
That's, what's it say on that? That's not the loader, is it?
Oh, I haven't got the,
No, I don't know those boys.
two boys.
Mechanograph, making the diagram. That's where you set the parameters on these long shafts. It hinges or it pivots on that point there, and put a pen in there, and it draws varying spirals, a mechanograph. That one could look like a hammerhead crane. They would have all bearings or wheels in their cranes to make sure it turns. But you have a look at the kids' faces. They reckon it's really good. They think it's really wonderful. Yeah, 2 boys unknown.
The others will probably pick that on names.
There again. That's a bit later than mine. I don't know that. He looks older. That's a coal loader. They don't do this nowadays. We would look at those because we were British, because we knew in England they used coal loaders, and that's what we got as models, because that's what the British knew. So none of this modern stuff of having these huge things that we see nowadays in Eastern States. But essentially all it is a bucket. You come along here and these things get picked up and they take that. It needs a fair bit of precision because you're dealing in the main, we did, with little bits of string and rubber bands. And if you were really good, you had a little chain drive. But the whole essence of the meccano was to be able to get the damn thing to work. Not because the meccano parts were defective, but it was the timing and the tensions that you had to get right. And sure enough, as soon as you got the thing working, despite the warnings alongside, please don't touch this, and that adult would go, whoop! And there's another frame. And the thing here, if you notice the boy, you become a possessor. The fact that you built that was yours. And if someone came there to look at it, you knew all about it. You actually knew much more than an adult because he hadn't built it. So you would proudly go through the whole thing and show them. But you see again the amount of work, other than the sheer just putting together mechanical parts. The business of making it work. One of the ones that was often spoken about was in Lionel Sargent's place for a while, was a working grandfather clock. And I have a particular memory, and this is when I was growing up, and as a boy you tend to look at those who are older and think, gosh, I wish it was like him. I can still vividly remember Bert Whitney and my friend Barry Stewart, who was, he was prematurely strong, you know what I mean? He developed very early, whereas I was a puny little thing. And they were having a competition in the club room, very no mucking around. This was very, very serious. We're all standing around looking at this. And each of them was grabbing the weight that was used for the grandfather clock that I could just get off the ground. And each of them were going like this. And their faces go red and because the other was watching like that. That was staggered me. That's all I remember about the grandfather clock. But it was looked upon as a preeminent model, and it kept somewhat right time. There's another one, our Ferris wheel type of thing. Yeah, a lot of effort was put into making these. You would have to use proper bracing on those to take the tensions and things. All of that, in my day, was taken from a card, a 2D card, no 3D, and very little in the way of detail as to how things fitted together. And it was expected that you would start off with a simple model, and you'd always have trouble with everything. One of which was actually get the screws to fit, and you were not allowed to use leverage. You were not allowed to get the thing, you couldn't do that, it had to fit. So these models came as a result of at least 1 to 2 years constant effort and building up from a simple to a more complex model. So that by the time you got to this, and one of the other boys had a problem, you'd be able to say, that's how you do it. And it was all locked away, waiting for when you became an engineer. 1950? Yes, I don't know some of those. I know that one, my young brother.
Trevor's the fourth one along, Trevor Coltis.
Yeah, Tom, is it?
Trevor, on the top, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the top, sorry.
Yes, that would be when my young brother continued. His older brother had run off by then, pretty much. The people looked the same, never changed. There he is when he came back. We were pleased to see him. There he is now. Where's it, Nick? That was when you got trapped by the street photographer, remember?
Yeah.
And you'd say, no, I don't want the photo. Oh, yeah, it was too late. Yeah. And Western Ice, that went everywhere. And none of it was tourist stuff. Nowadays you find people in all the clubs that are around. I'm in a progress club and I make sure, remembering these days, we never go to craft shops or tourist events, which the things like the Mint are now. We've got Thursday we're going to the Orbital Engine Company, where I've already seen it about 5 years, 6 years ago. We're looking at their latest development. And whenever anything comes up in the newspaper that I see in engineering, I go put it through to our outings man. And he found one reason why we're still a men's club. Otherwise we'd end up going to craft shops. Mike?
There's a sign on the end of there.
Yeah, well, it's Western Ice. Yeah. That was in Murray Street. But that was typical, you know, we'd go to all these places. Don't know what he's doing on bike. Yeah, well, the bike riding was wonderful. We would go all over the place. I remember one time we went a certain time down. There were very few cars on the road, and so we could wander all over the place on the bikes. Virtually no brakes, no gears. We just went.
Just after it was built. Just after it built it. It's certainly on there.
Yeah. It was not my thing. Yeah, it was a fascinating time. Anyway, any more questions?
Do you advertise in the meccano club? I consider it advertising.
I'm a proxy. I can tell you all about 1947, 1941. I don't know. They've got a website. It gives you all you need to know. Yeah. The website's got everything on it there, so you can go through it and it'll give you whatever you want. They're a bit surprised. They actually had an address of South Perth. Then I realised that was their box number.
It's on that photograph.
That's right, that's why I left it on. But essentially, the club owns the property, so they're not going to move to mainland. So you can rest assured that the Historical Society will retain that premise as a monument to a very great man. That's for sure.
Well, Al, don't sit down. I'd just like to thank you very much.